The American Revolution of 1776, Birth of a Nation. Part 1, Sparks of Rebellion. It was in the year 1775, and the 13 colonies in America were at a crossroad. The colonists had suffered under the molten rule of the British Crown over a period of years. The taxes were killing them off, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, laws made by a foreign king on the other side of the Atlantic, a king who had never set one foot on their soil and yet expected to be obeyed. The Boston, New York, and Philadelphia streets were hotbeds. Common men and women, farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants started whispering the unthinkable, what they said would be to break free of Britain. Boston was the first to have the fire break out. British soldiers were literally walking around the city like conquerors with their red coats gleaming in the sun. It also climaxed in March 1770 when the British forces fired on unarmed colonists in the Boston Massacre, killing them on the frozen cobblestones. Blood covered the streets, and along with it, confidence in the crown was broken. But the final insult came in 1773. People of Boston had enough when Parliament compelled the colonists to purchase British tea only. Indeed, one moonlit night, men in disguise of Native Americans entered the harbor boarding vessels. In a shriek of resistance, they threw crates of tea into the sea. The leaves made the waters black, and the message was clear that America would bow no more. Britain responded with fury. Ports were closed, soldiers filled the streets. The chain of despotism strangled. However, rather than fear, it brought unity. The previously independent colonies started to become one. The First Continental Congress held in Philadelphia in 1774, where the delegates demanded their rights as free men. The first shots were fired then on the fields of Lexington and Concord, April 1775. Whoever drew the trigger, nobody knows, but the sound reverberated like thunder all through history. There was a musket grabbing of the farmers and a British army, against whom the English had not imagined it possible to fight. The shot heard round the world was the start of the war that was to alter everything. By 1776, a revolution was on fire as never before. George Washington, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, leaders who emerged out of the crowd, no longer were men but were symbols of freedom. In Philadelphia, they were ready to do the unimaginable, declare independence with the most powerful empire on the planet. The world was on the verge of realizing the birth of a nation. The birth of a nation, the American Revolution of 1776. Part 2, Proclamation of Independence. The summer in 1776 was full of tensions. The atmosphere in Philadelphia was filled with debate in the halls of the Second Continental Congress. Should they truly break away? To be independent was to war against the most powerful empire in the world, and yet to be under Britain was chains forever. The decision was reached on July 2nd. Votes of colonies, they would be free. On July 4th, 1776, 2 days after, the world had changed. A young Virginian called Thomas Jefferson wrote quill to parchment, and his words smoldered with truth. Equal before God are all men. They are endowed with inherent rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. By signing their names in the Declaration of Independence, the delegates realized that they were as well signing a death warrant in case the revolution would not be successful. Yet none flinched. They had bold signatures, and their courage was not shaken. The Liberty Bell was ringing outside Philadelphia, its iron voice telling the world, a new nation has been born. They would not get their freedom without a struggle. The British retaliated angrily. The Redcoats had landed in New York, and their warships were crowding around the harbor like forest trees with black masts. Muskets thwacked, cannons blasted, and the skies were covered with smoke. General George Washington and his ragged Continental Army opposed them, not men of arms, but farmers, carpenters, and shopkeepers, and with courage that was their only weapon. The men of Washington were beaten after beaten. They were outnumbered, underfed, and they were going through the terrible winters. At Valley Forge, the soldiers had rags around their feet to keep themselves warm in the snow because their stomachs were empty, but also to keep their hearts warm. And yet, miracles came. One cold Christmas night in the year 1776, Washington crossed the frozen Delaware River. His army instigated a horrifying attack on the unsuspecting Hessian forces at Trenton and won the battle in the most stunning manner. It was quite straightforward. America was not going to die so easily. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The dream of freedom became stronger with the help of the allies such as France. In all the colonies, church bells were ringing, drums beating, and farmers fought on. They had ceased being mere colony people and became Americans. The revolution did not end yet. The blood would still flow on the battlefields of Yorktown, and sacrifices would tremble a family. But in 1776, the fire had been lit. The colonies had proclaimed themselves as free. The Independence War had actually started. And that too, the birth of the United States of America. The birth of a nation, American Revolution of 1776. Part 3, Victory at Yorktown. As of 1778, the Independence War had been lingering. America was bleeding. Families were separated, farms burnt, and soldiers were interred in shallow graves. Freedom was a question to many whether it had been but a dream. But that dream refused to die. General George Washington had his army on its knees by mere brutality. He was a great man, a giant in a way that made his men know that they were not fighting a war alone, but a war to save the soul of a new nation. The climax in this scenario was the French joining the war as the ally of America. The ships of Frenchmen overcame the Atlantic and brought weapons, soldiers, and hope. The British were suddenly fighting not only insurrectionists among their colonies, but also a world war. Washington got his opportunity in the summer of 1781. General Charles Cornwallis and his British army had taken up entrenchments in a small town in Virginia, known as Yorktown. Should Washington be able to make a blow over there, the war would be over. The trap was laid with the assistance of French troops, with Marquis de Lafayette on the ground and Admiral de Grasse on the sea. September 28, 1781, the siege of Yorktown opened. Cannon rolled round day and night, shaking the earth, crashing down British fortifications. The sky was full of smoke, and American and French soldiers were packing the trenches, closer and closer to the enemy. Washington was there himself in the midst of battle, and his face was illuminated by the fire of war, and never did he start when cannonballs flew through the air. It was attacked the last time on the 14th of October. The American soldiers were attacking British redoubts in the middle of the night with bayonets and their war songs shredding the night. The men of Cornwallis fought to the last gasp, but were overpowered. On October 19, 1781, the unimaginable took place. Cornwallis surrendered. The defeat slowly beating the British drums, the flags were brought down. Prior to Washington, the British had thrown their arms down. The war was not officially finished yet, however. Yorktown was the death strike to the British rule in America. The Treaty of Paris was signed 2 years later in 1783. The United States was independent, as acknowledged by Britain. Blood and fire had given the world a new nation. The United States of America was not created in bliss, did not struggle in peace, was not created in prosperity, was created in sacrifice. The country was made of the valor of those who plowed, of the steel of which Washington belonged, of the pen of Jefferson. The Revolution was over, yet the real quest of America had just set in. The American Revolution of 1776, the birth of a nation. Part 4, the birth of a nation. The firearms went dead, the smoke had vanished, and a new dawn broke in upon the 13 colonies. The war was completed, and only the task of nation building had begun. Cities in America were in ruins, farms had been burned, families were mourning. But there, in the rubble, there was greater hope than ever. The men and women who now had everything to lose now had another challenge: to make freedom a living, breathing thing. In Philadelphia, the founding fathers once more met. Though they no longer had to fight, they had to make a nation. They fought, quarreled, and even at times came into conflict, but they were all striving towards a common objective: a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The conception of the Constitution of the United States was a product of compromise, boldness, and vision, a system on which there was promise of liberty, justice, and equality. When the fledgling country was grappling with the dualism of slavery and inequality, it was indeed wrong, this, yet it belonged to them. George Washington, who is a legend himself, came forward to be the first president. He had the burden of a new nation on his shoulders, and he knew that liberty, which had been secured by muskets and blood, now had to be directed by law and leadership. In the rest of the country, common individuals, farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, women, and children started to restructure their lives. Schools were opened, markets were busy in business, and the American spirit started flourishing. The concepts of liberty and democracy, formerly whispered in taverns and meeting halls, were now a fact. The world watched in awe. The largest empire on earth had been overpowered by a group of colonies. A nation which had been a subject now was a citizen of a new, independent nation. The American Revolution was not just a fight, but an epic of bravery, sacrifice, and undauntedly strong human spirit. It was the tale of a nation who had managed to hold on to the idea that freedom was worth struggling for, that tyranny could be confronted, and that a new nation could emerge out of the fires of revolt. Therefore, the United States of America came into existence, not on paper, but in the hearts of its citizens, a hope for the future generations.